Hello, everybody. Welcome to Coaching Done Better Livecast. As the bass drops, we are in for a great day today. Coming to you live from Pompano Beach. We have author Rod Collins on today, and we're going to be discussing his book, Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody. I actually have this right here to prove that it's a real book. Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody, available on Amazon. And Rod has become a friend, a consultant of mine, and an advisor, if you will. I've been connected with Rod through the C-Suite, which is Jeffrey Hazlett's group, and he has proved to be somebody that you want in your corner when it comes to running large organizations. He's an author of a leading edge and a leading edge expert on the self-managed organization and the future of business, really. I mean, I'm really enthralled by the principles of this book. He's a regular blog contributor on Substack, where he explores how technological innovations continue to transform the rules for how successful businesses work. He's also a leadership coach and a member of the one and only Coaching Done Better Network. His latest book, which we'll be talking to him today about, Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody, Why the Self-Managed Teams Make Better Decisions and Deliver Extraordinary Results. This book highlights the innovative tools and practices used by a new breed of business leader who understands that peer-to-peer network are far more effective than top-down hierarchies. Rod is the former Chief Operating Executive of the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program, the FEP, one of the nation's largest and most successful business alliances. Under his leadership, using the principles and practices described in his new book, that business experienced its greatest 5-year growth period in its 60-year history. Welcome to the show, Mr. Collins.
Jeremy, great to be with you.
Well, I'll tell you, we've been working together on and off. You are an early adapter of the Coaching Done Better platform. In fact, you helped me kind of prod me into changing the name from plenty of coaches. You're one of the ones that go, this one's better, man. Go for it. So I appreciate you.
Great. Good to be with you today.
Yeah. So congratulations on the book launch. And is this your first book?
No, this is my third book.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Why is this the third book?
Well, the first two books, first one was Leadership in a Wiki World, and that was about the what of this new and different type of management model. The second one was called Wiki Management, and that was about the how, and that focused on 50 specific practices that any business leader could put in any organization. This third one is about the why, and I think the why is important because we're going through such rapid change now that if businesses are going to navigate a world transformed by rapid change, it's not enough to know what and how. You also have to understand why. The self-managed peer-to-peer network is a radically different management model, very different from what we traditionally do. And I think grasping the why helps people to stay with this different model as they employ the how.
Well, speaking of the hows, I've got a ton of questions here for you. Just right from the book. And I wanted to really let people understand the book. I got through this book this morning. Now, I don't read every word. That's not how I read. I'm dyslexic. I'm an extreme skimmer, but when I see something catches my eye, I take copious notes. So I think if I read this front to back and I read every word, I would have much less memory of the copious notes that I would take skimming. And that's just how my brain works. And when you write something down, you tend to remember it. So when I make these big notes, and then the second time I skim it, I'll either see that note again, that section, and it'll catch my eye, and I'll read it again, or I'll catch something else. I used to read maybe 2 books a week because I took 2 to 4 flights a week, and I would read a book on a flight. I learned how to do really good skimming. For those of you who are dyslexic and who have a hard time reading, if you learn how to skim really effectively, I've gotten a lot of information from books like yours. I mean, I think I took about 3 hours in your book this morning, and so it's really a nice linear read. In other words, it really does make sense. It flows, and it opens up a lot of ahas for me. And I've spent a lot of time in business, so kudos. That's a compliment there. The first one is really, let's talk about just chapter one. Basically, I got something for about every chapter, but I love the idea that business is a customer-driven operation these days, because your customers are, in your words, far more demanding than any boss could be.
Yes.
I guess let's just touch on that principle, or that fact, really, that the employees don't answer to the bosses as much. They still do, because that's how they run their business. But who's really running the show of a company these days?
Well, at the heart of the peer-to-peer self-managed organization is there are no bosses. Everyone is a leader.
But in fact, the reason that's important to know, and that's what we're going to get into,
Yeah.
because the customer has such a voice these days that they're louder than the bosses are.
And that's very true. And at the heart of the self-managed network organization is the purpose of a business. Now, anybody who's gone through graduate school, gotten an MBA, it's just drummed into your mind that the purpose of a business is to create shareholder value. And I suggest that it is not, okay? The purpose of a business is to create customer value. Now, what's the distinction and why? Am I saying shareholder value is not important? No, shareholder value is very important because it measures the results of the business. But what I am saying is you can't directly impact shareholder value. Shareholder value is a dependent variable. The independent variable is customer value. If you're delivering customer value, you will get shareholder value.
Right.
But if you overfocus on shareholder value and focus only on the money, you wake up one day and see you have no customers. And that's what happened to Kodak, which was
Wow.
a century-old business who was focused on shareholder value. And despite the fact that they invented the digital camera, people might be surprised to learn that, they threw it on a shelf, put it in a closet, a shelf in a closet, closed the door, and said, forget about this thing, because it's getting in the way of the way that we make money. And that is, we sell film.
I wonder, was Jeffrey Hazlett during that time?
I don't know, but
He was with them for a couple of years, wasn't he?
I think he was.
Was.
But that's the problem is Kodak lost sight that the purpose of a business is customer value. If they knew that, they would have taken this invention of theirs, the digital camera, and they would have invented the iPhone. So
Right.
Kodak should be Apple today, all right? But because they were focused on shareholder value rather than customer value, they fell into a trap.
So that leads to the next question that I have on here, which is about innovation and how a hierarchy kills it.
Yes.
Just to that exact point.
This is the great advantage of the self-managed peer-to-peer network, is that it is better designed for innovation. And to understand why, we need to get at the two fundamental questions that a organization model has to answer. The first is who decides, and the second is how does power work? Now, in the hierarchy, who decides? It's the elite few, and
Yes.
they're given command and control authority. How does power work? It's essentially a function of force. Power in the top-down hierarchy is coercive power. People have the legitimate authority to command their subordinates to do what they otherwise might choose not to do. Now, the peer-to-peer network answers the questions very differently, and this will give us some insight into why it is better designed for innovation. In the peer-to-peer network, who decides? Everyone. Everyone on the team. So work is done in the context of teams, and there's no one in charge of the teams. The teams are self-managed. And how does power work? Power is a function of an entirely different dimension, not force, but energy.
Yeah,
And so
that's
it's synergistic power, not coercive power. Now, how does this tie into innovation? When you give the elite few the authority to make the decisions, you are bringing with that their unconscious biases without the ability to challenge them. Because if anyone does challenge them, well, that could be cause for termination. In the peer-to-peer network, because people don't have coercive authority, because everyone's involved in decision making, then ideas get challenged as they're being produced. And so any unconscious biases wind up coming to the fore and wind up getting handled. And this is extremely important in rapidly changing times because in the 20th century, if unconscious biases led to a poor decision, there was time to regroup and to do over. In today's rapidly changing market, if you don't get it right the first time, you're history. And that's what Blockbuster found out.
yeah.
They were wedded to the home rental DVD market, and and it just went away. And their unconscious bias was it'll never go away. But that idea needed to be challenged.
Well, also, I think to their particular issue was back to the shareholder dollar. They didn't want to lose out on the $1, $2 fees for rewinding.
Well, what was interesting about Blockbuster is they had what I call bad profits. The difference between good profits and bad profits. Good
The
profits
punitive
are
profit, right?
well, the good profit is when you deliver customer value and you delight your customers. All right. A bad profit is when you make money at the expense of your customers.
Yeah.
All of the profit margin of Blockbuster was from late fees,
Late
which
fees,
the
yeah.
people hated.
Yeah,
And
and that's what
so
as soon as Netflix said, we're going to mail you them, mail it back whenever you're ready. Then you'll
that's
get the next one. It's up
their
to you.
model. Yeah. Now Netflix is an example of a company that could innovate because think about it. They're not mailing DVDs anymore.
No, that's right. They've gone
They
on. Yeah.
they evolved to streaming
Yeah.
and they've evolved
And they
to
also had a
production.
big foot in the gaming, and they went, okay, they pulled back from that. They
Yes.
went all in on the one thing. So they had an initial core initiative, right? A key initiative, and that they thought that was going to be the way to go. So they put all their attention towards that.
Yes. If a company's going to stay on the Fortune 500 in the 21st century, they have to be able to evolve. They have to be able to displace their own products over time. One thing that everybody on this call working for a traditional business that's making good profits on a particular product model, the one thing you can be certain of, whatever product model you're delivering today will be obsolete faster than you want it to be. It's not going to, business models and product models don't last for 30 to 40 years like they did in the 20th century. And so that product is going to be displaced. And my question for our listeners is, why not you? Why don't you replace your product? Because if you don't, somebody else will. And
Yeah,
then you won't be around.
that is true. So I've got some other things here, like just things we talked about. That the idea of the team coming up with their own thoughts and being challenged. You actually have a name for that called no debate meetings.
That's right. I personally discovered the power of collective intelligence, and that's what networks do. They leverage collective intelligence, whereas hierarchies leverage the individual intelligence of the elites. But I discovered collective intelligence by accident. In a past life, you mentioned earlier that I was the chief operating executive of the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program. And it was a business alliance of 39 separate companies. And we had endured 2 decades of an average performance, and we wanted to increase both. And at the time, I had been the general auditor in the business and was moved over the operations, and was asked to lead the turnaround. And as I thought about it, the light bulb moment was when I realized we're not leading a hierarchy, we're leading a network. But we were managing it as if we were leading a hierarchy. So we had to discover a different way to process information in meetings. And one of the things I recognized is we really never came to the closure we needed to move forward because we couldn't resolve differences. And so I thought we need to create a no debate meeting because we were involved in endless debates. And so we came up with a 2-day format where we brought about 40 or 50 people from a representative group of the different organizations. And the idea was get a microcosm of the business in the room so that if anything comes up that affects anybody else, they can react in real time.
Almost like the government has the House of Representatives with the representatives representing the people from their areas.
But but they don't facilitate well. And that's the
Well,
difference.
I'm talking about the model, though.
Yes.
You have a voice from your department that is in lockstep with what's going to benefit you or affect you, whatever comes off of that from that meeting.
Yes, although I do think there's a lot of debating that goes on in the House, and these meetings were different from that in that this was especially so in the first couple of hours. When we had people present the various points of view, they would have some time to do that. And then at the end of it, people could ask clarifying questions only. They couldn't agree. They couldn't disagree. They couldn't say, I have a better idea. All they could do is ask questions to understand what the presenter had just presented, regardless of agreement or disagreement. And we would get multiple points of view out in this type of way. Now, what that does is, when people debate, and you do see this in the House of Representatives, they're not listening. They're not trying to understand the other.
They're trying to convince.
They're trying to combat the other point of view and convince you of their point of view. When people have to ask clarifying questions, and that's the only discourse allowed in the beginning, they have to understand. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted the first hours to be understanding different positions before we engaged in the discourse.
Okay, so that way that they have everybody, at least that point, if you're going to voice a different perspective, everyone's comfortable that everyone has a full understanding of what the presenter was trying to get across in the first place.
That's right. And the experience that happens is oftentimes people will say, oh, I didn't realize that that's what you're saying. All right. Now, when everybody begins to get that experience, at some point, we did open up for more general discussion, but we noticed two things. Number one, the discussion was far more productive because instead of people sitting there, as you see happen in debate meetings, that's a lousy idea. I don't agree with that. So, and we hear that. What we heard after the clarifying questions was, oh, I want to take this idea here and let's combine it with this. And somebody else would jump up and say, yes, and let's bring in this third idea. And what happens is you're coming up with better solutions to what are more and more increasingly complex problems. So that was the first thing.
Well,
Then
can I ask you the first point of like even being there? If it's a peer-to-peer network, truly, how is the decision made of who goes?
Well, in the particular thing I'm describing, that we invited people in. And so we were bringing peer-to-peer network techniques into what was a traditional organization. In those organizations that are designed wholly as self-managed networks, teams form themselves.
And so you have and I guess if they're considered all leaders, is it more like a representative of that team?
The teams decide their own decision rights. And so a team is generally 7 to 12 people, and they could either be handling an ongoing operation, they may be developing an innovative product, and they get to decide these things for themselves. And the way the decision rights work is if the group sits there and says, we have a single individual who has unique and expert knowledge, then they may say to that person, you're going to make the decision.
Okay.
But what is happening is the group decides the individual gets to make the decision, not the other way around. But more often than not,
it's just not a time thing. Somebody's got more time with a place. Typically, that's decided. That's the boss, which is never good.
Well, the boss
which is what unions are based on.
And the boss never knows all dimensions of the problem to be solved. Whereas teams will have different people who will have knowledge about different dimensions. And so what happens is the decision making can take different forms. A group could decide this is so important, we must have a unanimous decision. Or they may decide we're going to have a majority decision or a supermajority decision. And so they get to decide this for themselves. They also, over the course of the project, may decide that certain individuals, as I mentioned, should make the decision because of unique knowledge. But as the project proceeds, that role may shift around.
Yeah.
So, for example, when it comes to marketing, there may be someone who has a tremendous amount of marketing knowledge, and the group may say, you make those decisions. But when it comes to designing the production, they may say, you know, these three people over here, they really are the people who have the best input. So we're going to rely upon their judgment. The point is, you don't have this a priori notion that a single person makes all the decisions and only that person makes the decisions. And so you wind up with better decision making when the teams can decide their own decision rights.
And you do talk about how this is actually not a slower process, how it's actually a faster process.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Because what you're also working in the context of cross-functional teams. And so as one perspective thinks about we need to move in this direction, another perspective is right there on the team that can say, wait a minute, you've got to consider this aspect as well.
Right.
And we really have two issues we need to solve for to make a good decision.
Yeah.
How often in the hierarchy, a particular silo decides to make a decision? Perhaps marketing decides that it's
Domino effect.
It's going to it's going to push something in the market, but the operations people say, wait a minute.
How are we going to ship all this stuff?
How do we know we can even deliver this?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So go back to the meeting now. We got the perspectives have now been understood by asking questions, clarifying questions, and then the second part of that meeting. And by the way, I read about you come up with like 4 or 5 ideas, and you give it an A/B grade, and everyone kind of agrees the A's are priority over the B's, and that's kind of the decision on how to formulate which order we're talking about things throughout the day.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a really fair process. It sounds like. Which
Well,
I love.
let's come back to that. I'll describe that for our audience. But before we do, I do want to highlight what was the second thing
Yes.
we learned in what I called the collective intelligence workshops that we did when I was in Blue Cross Blue Shield. And the second thing was in creating a no debate meeting and seeing how creatively we came up with solutions that would combine different elements from different perspectives into solutions that, quite frankly, kept us on time and under budget in ways that we were not able to do before. We look back and realize we've tapped into a aspect of intelligence we'd never experienced before. And it's the collective intelligence of our own people. And I think it is the most untapped, wasted resource in most companies, and it's already paid for.
Right.
And all you have to do is have the aggregation mechanisms and the processes and the protocols to pull it together.
I think you need one more thing. You need a
already-
huge, where people come in and hang their coats? There's got to be a room called ego check.
That's true. And I
That's
think,
smart.
well, and this is what clarifying questions helps to accomplish, is over the course of time, as we begin to understand each other, then the need to defend positions or defend egos seems to go away. And people really get engaged around, let's solve this. And they really develop energy around solving this together and coming, and it's a real joy in putting together a brilliant solution that you realize none of us could have done alone. There's
Right.
a special joy that comes with that.
So you've got basically 4 conditions. I like this part. Diversity of opinions, which is great. Independent thinking, which is really 1-to-1 ratio there. I would believe local knowledge, which is good. That's the specific skill that you're employing from each group. But aggregation of mechanisms.
Okay.
What is that one?
Well, we have to give credit first. Those 4 attributes were identified by James Surowiecki in his timeless book called The Wisdom of Crowds. And so years after, a year or two after I left Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we had these collective intelligence workshops, and we had this capacity over the course of a decade to tap into our collective intelligence. I was wondering, why? How did that work? And so I picked up Surowiecki's book, and when I read it, he identified these four conditions, and I realized why what I called our collective intelligence workshops was so powerful. They had all four conditions: diversity of opinion, independent thinking, local knowledge, aggregation mechanisms. And you must have all four in order to tap into collective intelligence. And so, how did we have these? So, I mentioned before we had about 50 people in the room, microcosm of the business, but we deliberately invited diversity of views. And this is really important because in our larger society today, we're in trouble in this dimension.
Now,
We
I know what diversity of view is. I can tell who's maybe from a certain country or a certain region, but what is the diversity of the thought? How do you decide the diversity of thought? How do you kind of see to understand who to invite that?
Well, we had a good
Let's see
sense
it.
of the people that we were inviting in.
That's really important. So
Yeah.
you
And
have
we-
to know your people. In an organization that
yeah.
big, they struggle with that.
And you have to invite in opinions that you yourself don't believe in.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
you have
right.
to. That's
So
part of taking
diversity
your
of
ego
point
out.
of view is harder to see than diversity of view.
And we also looked at other elements of diversity. We looked at diversity of rural and urban. Okay, we made sure that we had both racial and sexual diversity in the room. We didn't want a group of all men. We wanted a balance of men and women. Okay, we didn't want people just from large plans in big cities. We wanted people from small organizations, large organizations.
Right.
We worked hard at coming up with the broadest base of diversity we could. The second thing is, and this is another place we're in trouble, independent thinking.
Yes.
Everybody was free to express their opinion without fear of retaliation. And
Well, they do it in a respectful way, I'm sure, right?
it's and that's the facilitator's job.
Yeah.
And so this is where clarifying questions come in, all right? Because you can't immediately object to an idea when it's presented out. And if you do ask the clarifying questions, you begin to think, well, I never looked at it that way before.
Love that.
You
I
may not change
love
whether
that.
you agree or not, okay?
Yeah.
But it may be an important aspect that needs to be taken into account. And we have to
Absolutely.
learn how you can't have a society where people don't live with people that they don't necessarily agree with.
Welcome
And
to the
so-
United States.
Yeah, and so anyway, Surowiecki identified these. The local knowledge was important. What was different about our meetings, in most organizations, people meet by either level or by department. Well, we were cross-fertilizing that. We had senior level people and people we hired just out of college in the same meeting with the same voice. And we had all the different departmental aspects represented in these sessions. And that was important because you wanted people to be reacting in real time, and it saves time and money. To give you an example of this, Buurtzorg is one of the companies I write about in the book. They're a home health care organization in the Netherlands. And there was a person, he was working for a home health bureaucracy. He said, there's got to be a better way. He left, he started a startup. And in his startup, he designed it as a self-managed organization. The organization was designed in terms of teams of 7 to 12 people, no bosses. They made decisions, they handled their own budgets, and they cut the cost of home health care by 33%. And today, 70% of home health care nurses work for Buurtzorg in the Netherlands. That happened organically. The nurses all came and said, we want to work for you because it's a better way to work and it delivered a higher value for the customers. And why did it cut costs in half? Because the people got better faster, because the care was more human. You had the same nurse coming and visiting with you in the context of a relationship instead of Nurse Judy is here on Monday. Nurse Sue is here on Wednesday, and Nurse Sally is here on Friday.
Well, I think
That's
another
just,
contributor to that percentage, it sounds like they got rid of the most expensive part of a people organization, which is leadership roles over time. You
that's
know, the supervisor, the director, the managers, those roles pretty much over time are designed to go away, and those are typically the highest paid in that department.
well, that might have happened here. I don't know if that happened in this case, but I do know that what really happened is Joost de Block, who was the founder, wanted a more human approach. And his hypothesis is if we have a more human approach to delivering home health care, and if we take away the bureaucracy, we're going to provide better care, higher quality, at a lower cost. And the
Yeah.
hypotheses prove to be true. And it's a situation in which the nurses preferred to work in because over time, 70% wound up working for this one company.
Yeah, and probably staying for a lot longer than the average.
And, and they all met the aspects of Sorowiecki's 4 aspects of collective intelligence.
So we don't know if we got a real answer though. I was trying to kind of read into it. I didn't find that answer. The aggregation of mechanisms. So
Okay.
aggregation means putting together, and I know mechanisms are
Well,
different systems, I imagine.
Well, the term is aggregation mechanism. And so
Yeah.
let me give an example. When we did the collective intelligence workshops, I pointed out how we had diversity of opinion. We invited different voices in. The facilitator made sure that people were free to express their opinions without fear of retaliation. We had a lot of local knowledge because we didn't just have high level people, we had people close to the processes. But when we would decide, let me step back for a second. Oftentimes, if we were dealing with a difficult problem, we would divide the group into about 5 or 6 tables and say, in small groups, come up with your ideas for solutions to the problems. And we'd ask them to put them on one flip chart and to come up with maybe anywhere from 5 to 8 items. And so each of those tables would report out. You might have anywhere from about 40 to 60 items coming out of there.
Yeah.
And what we would do is we put them on a wall and we would combine the duplicates. So maybe now we're down to a list of 30. And then I would give people strips of stick-on dots. And I usually it was about 4 or 5. And I would tell them you can vote for the final 30 items that we have on the wall, the mutually exclusive list. Vote those dots any way you want. If you feel passionate about this one item is the most important aspect for a solution, you can put all 4 dots on one item if you want, or you can spread them around. It's your choice. And what invariably happened 95% of the time is there would be a top 4. And what that would look like is you might look at the votes and see it's 35, 34, 33, 30, 15. So there's this obvious break point.
Yes.
And then I would look at the group and say, if we do these 4 things, will it solve the problem? And invariably people would go, yes. And what would be interesting about the 4 things is one item would be really important to one political faction. Another item would be important to the opposing political faction. And the 3rd and 4th items were the glue that when you put it together with the other 2, made the whole set of 4 workable. And what astounded me with the use of these aggregation mechanisms, I was stunned over the 10-year period how often 50 people came to unanimous agreement.
Wow.
Far, far more often than not. And the reason was we hit a higher level solution than you would ever get in the normal debate mode. We came up with creative solutions. We applied this approach to help us to guide putting in a new health insurance system, which are very complex systems that typically have a lot of problems over the first couple months. When we use this basic framework to handle the problem solving, we put up a new healthcare system where we didn't have a single customer-facing issue. It was delivered on time and under budget.
Wow.
And that is rarely happens in systems conversions. But that's because we tapped into collective intelligence and we were able to come up with higher level solutions to the problems as we encountered them. And by having everybody in the same room at the same time, recognizing nobody's smarter than everybody,
Yes.
we were able to come up with better and faster solutions.
How do you deal with departments going off brand? I don't know if that ever comes up, but there's a certain color codes, there's certain phraseologies, there's certain logos, there's certain sayings, slogans. Do you ever have issues with people saying we're independent thinkers and we don't like that slogan, so we're going to say something else when we answer the phones over here? There's got to be some sort of way to govern things that are not. You're independent, but within a certain realm, right? Is there a certain respect of the company itself, of the overruling society?
It's a good question because this is behavior we see in typical corporations all the time. And one of the surprising things is when we put this in, that stopped. Because and looking back, I realized why. Why do people say, I'm going in a different direction? They do so because
Be heard.
well, it's not just to be heard, but it is when the organization has decided we're going down this path, and in your department or in your perspective, you realize that's going to be problematic because you haven't taken into account something that I know about.
Yeah.
And they know that down the road, everybody else is discovering it. Then you have sown the seeds in which this particular department thinks it's the right thing to do to object and move in a different direction. Now, the beauty of the collective intelligence workshops that we used at the beginning of formulating solutions, and this is why it was so important to have different perspectives. If something came up that we're moving down a particular pathway, a representative from that other perspective would be in the room and they could stand up and go, no, you've got to consider this. And then the facilitator would say, all right, we don't just have one aspect to solve for, we now have two. And
So it's not if all or nothing. We can make both happen. They're
as
not
the discussion
exclusive.
goes on, somebody else will say, here's something. And what it is, and this was the beauty of this approach, is we got the problems identified before we committed resources.
Wow, that's
And
huge.
and when everyone, this is, I think the most surprising thing to me when we did this inside the Blues was how often, as I mentioned before, I can't think of a time in the 10 years where the 50 people didn't leave the room in unanimous agreement. And it's because people object when they know something is important, is not in a solution. When you design a process that says we're going to take all of these things into consideration and find a solution that is acceptable to everyone, then there's no need for a department to object.
Right. You
There's
call that
no need.
honoring their voices.
Yes, and there's no need for, and somebody is not in a position of, I know something that's really important that's not being considered, and I'm in the difficult position where I have to choose between going along and I know it's not going to work, or making noise and making people unhappy, but I really care about the company. You
Yeah.
take that dynamic and it disappears because you are honoring all the voices up front, and that's why you save time and money.
So are those the biweekly workshops?
All right, now
Or those
you're
the larger? Is that a larger quarterly thing, or
there's two things I write about in the book. One is the collective intelligence workshops, which we've been talking about,
yes?
which we used when we were building products, building systems, or trying to solve a particular operational problem that was problematic.
Okay.
The other thing you're referring to, and this is particularly a discipline for senior leadership teams. And most senior leadership teams will go off site once a year for a strategy session.
Yeah. Retreat or whatever they call them.
Right. What we did, I took the senior leadership team off site once every 2 weeks.
Yes, that's it was really
All right.
surprising.
Once every 2 weeks. And our listeners may be going, what? Who has time for that? All right. And so I want to challenge our listeners. And I'm going to give them an example of an exercise I use when I work with a leadership team. I will give them 2 Post-it notes, and I'll say on the first Post-it note, I want you to put down 3 numbers. They must add up to be 100. And it is the percentage of time you spend on strategy, on people, on operations. They fill them out, I hand them in, and I array them, and we'll find the median value. The second one I give them is write 3 numbers. Again, they must add to be 100 on the amount of time you should spend on strategy, you should spend on people, and you should spend on operations. And as often as I've done this, I get a common answer to both of those. The first set, which is what do we actually do, the numbers tend to be 10, 10, 80. 10% on strategy, 10% on people, 80% on operations. And when we look at the median value for what it should be, it's 40 strategy, 40 people, 20 operations. So I'll circle the 80 on the first Post-it, and I'll circle the 20 on the second Post-it and say you have a 60-point gap. You're the senior leadership team. You're spending all your time in operations. Who the hell does strategy in this business? Because it doesn't appear to be you.
And so every biweekly is just a part of the strategy which is
what it is, and this is really important in rapidly changing times. The most important job of the senior leadership team is to understand what's happening outside the business.
yes.
And to get past the individual biases of all the people on the team. And so by going off-site once every 2 weeks, do not let the operations intrude. You're going to be developing the skills of your people and have them handle the problems. They can do that once every 2 weeks.
They have those BlackBerries back then? They had BlackBerries back then? Do you have a strict
We had BlackBerries back then.
break only checking emails?
That's why we put them away during the meetings, and it's why we are off-site so that
that was senior leadership, but that was more local. So they did that locally to their own, and because you were national, right?
Well, and now we had a headquarters in Washington. And
so did you fly the senior leadership?
Well, the senior leadership team was all located.
Was there? Okay, so it's a local thing.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And so and we got into issues deeply.
Operation.
Something people can relate to. We're really seeing the value of long-form podcasts now. All right, and the importance of an hour and a half,
Speaking of that, like, follow, and subscribe to this long-form podcast.
Well, and I think people are experiencing. I'm learning more from long-form podcasts than I have been from these, 3 to 4 minute flybys that you see on broadcast TV.
Oh, yeah.
And this is what we needed to do as a senior leadership team. We would spend an hour and a half to 3 hours on a particular item to make sure we all understood it. Because and also we had a discipline among our group. No single person on that group could make a decision that would affect anybody outside their area without discussing it with this group. So that if it is touching areas, we're coming up with comprehensive solutions. Again, that's how you save time, and it's how you save money. And the senior staff really appreciated these meetings. They felt that even though it was difficult going off-site once every 2 weeks, there was a part of them that said, I don't have time for this. But there was a bigger part of them that said, we don't have time not to do this.
Yeah. So that's where you go. In the old days, you called them collective heroes, and now you've got effective teams.
Yeah.
And they're run by leadership who understands the forward-facing issues intimately, because they honor the voices of that forward-facing team.
Yeah, and one of the big structural differences between the hierarchy and a network is hierarchies are identified by functional silos, whereas networks are organized by cross-functional teams. And why is that important? Let's go back to the 20th century. The 20th century is the ending of the industrial age. The industrial age is all about machines. Our thinking is mechanical. And the thing about machines, the problems in machines are rarely complex. They're complicated. And when you have a complicated problem, what does it mean? if you have a problem with your car and it's in the carburetor, I can take the carburetor out, play around. I don't have to look at any of the other parts. Get that fixed, put it back in the car, and the car works.
Everything works.
And so
I
cars
see where
are
you're
like,
going.
so the top-down hierarchy assumes that human organizations work
Yeah.
like machines.
Right.
Well, in the 20th century, that worked because most of our issues were mechanical in nature, complicated problems. In the 21st century, in a post-digital age, our problems are not complicated, they're complex.
Right.
And
So when
so
you
the
mess with
only way
one
they can be,
carburetor,
yeah, the only way they can be solved is all the parts must be solved in the face of each other. Our
yes.
problems are more organic now than they are mechanical, and networks handle problems more organically, whereas hierarchies handle issues more mechanically.
So that's the and it kind of that leads us into this little note. It says a management system versus a management style.
All right. And so what I'm referring to there, I use as an example in the book the wonderful work that Alan Mulally did when he went to Ford. All right.
Yes.
There are a lot of people who question the judgment of Bill Ford bringing Alan Mulally in. And Bill, to his credit, I think
And that was Henry's son, right? So we're only talking,
I
was it
think it's one of his great, I think it's his
grandson?
grandson.
But it's only one or two generations removed from.
But what's amazing about that story is Bill Ford recognizes somebody else needs to lead this organization rather than me. Now, I think he demonstrated an incredible amount of maturity. He brings in Alan Mulally, who comes from Boeing. And people question, why are you bringing somebody who makes airplanes into a car
Their
company?
cars.
All right. And when Alan Mulally is brought in, he's told, you can fire anybody in the leadership team that you want. You can bring in your own people. And he says, I don't think I'm going to need to do that because he knows the solution is a better management system. And so he brings in this networked approach. Alan Mulally took his senior leadership team offsite not once every 2 weeks, once a week.
Wow.
Okay, because he understood all the issues have to be solved in the
Yes.
presence of the whole team so that we can understand all the dimensions. And Alan Mulally remarkably turned Ford around. Now, what happened when Alan left? All right, his successor didn't last more than a couple of years because oftentimes when CEOs come in, they feel I have to leave my
Oh,
individual mark. All
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And if he had just left the system alone and said, I'm going to continue doing the approach that Alan had taken,
Yeah.
then, and so this is the,
And that
this
goes
is
back
what,
to ego.
well, this is management style versus management system.
Yeah. He went back to the way that things were always done.
Yeah. What Alan Mulally had in effect was a management style.
Yes.
And so his successor, because the hierarchy remained, that was never totally, that wasn't killed. Alan used this network approach as his management style, but didn't change the fundamental nature of the organization. It remained a hierarchy.
Right. They kept
The
their.
new CEO could come in and do that. Now let's contrast that with a company our listeners will be familiar with. They know their products. The makers of Gore-Tex, W.L. Gore and Associates, has been around since 1958. It's an 11,000 person company in 30 countries around the world. And over all this time, over 70 years, almost 70 years, there have never been any bosses in this 11,000 person company. And if they have a CEO for external purposes,
Yeah.
but that CEO doesn't have command and control authority. So if that CEO retires and a new one comes in, they can't stand up and say, well, this is a new day here.
Right.
And beginning today, this is the way it's going to be. At Gore, people could laugh and say, good luck with that, and because they have a management system.
How do
and
they,
it's not
how do they
dependent on the
manage?
management style.
How do they manage discord or human behavior issues with that management style where there's no leaders, especially locally? In other words, somebody's routinely late, somebody routinely is surfing on the net. Do they know how to hire better because of the system, or how do they deal with conflict?
A couple of things there. I think it takes a certain amount of maturity to operate in a system like this. And so I think they're probably selecting accordingly. But
This is a process that's going to take a minute to put into place if your organization is, you know, over 100 employees, let's say, which is probably a very minute little small company for the system. But let's just take that number. It's
yeah,
not something
well,
you can just put into play and, hey, everyone, no bosses tomorrow.
what's interesting
No
is
boss Friday. Let's try that.
well, what's interesting is Gore is organized into autonomous units of generally about 150 people.
I think the word that fits best is probably they have the very unique culture. It's unseen. Yeah.
But your system sets your culture.
Right. The culture is a result.
Yes.
And they've created this culture where when you come in there, you're expected to be professional. You're expected to be on time. It's respect for the autonomy.
Yeah. Well, let's take Gore. When you're hired by Gore, you don't have a job. Your first order of business is you have to find a place to work here.
That is
mind
blowing.
You'll be assigned, in effect, a guardian angel who
Wow.
will be with you for about 90 days to show you around the company, to introduce you to people. But your first order of business is you have to find a team to work on.
Huh. So how do they know they need to hire somebody then?
Well, they bring people on as they need to. So, for example, I mentioned their units about 150. If a unit approaches 200, they divide them in half because this way of organizing becomes difficult.
So that's how they scale, but they are their own responsible for their own numbers and KPIs, and to the king.
Yeah.
Look, either we have slimmed down or we have to divide. Are we making money or are we losing money?
Yeah, all those things will come into place. But I think people will normally come as people leave and people retire.
Okay.
So there's a sense we
Very,
need to
very
have a
interesting.
certain,
What do they make? I'm not very familiar with that company.
yeah,
Or
they make Gore-Tex.
what is Gore-Tex? Or it seems like it's like a coater, like a
It's a coating on your raincoat.
yeah. It's like, so it's a coat. It's the coating that's on the raincoat that makes
Yes.
it weatherproof.
That's their most famous product. If you're a musician, they make Elixir guitar strings, and they transform that industry because I am a guitarist and I don't have to change strings every 6 weeks anymore. Now I can go 6 to 8 months
Oh wow.
because of the coating they put on them. And that was an innovative product that was just that a team came up with, and they were
Right.
able to develop it.
And afraid to talk about it. I know we're pushing our time, so I really want to get to this part because this is the part
Yes.
that I really did slow down and start reading a bit about. But how there's a saying, power tends to lead to corruption, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
And you talk about incorruptible power here.
Yeah, I have a chapter in there called When Power Does Not Corrupt.
Yes.
And this is the difference between coercive and synergistic power. In the hierarchy, power is inherently coercive. And I think Lord Acton got it partially right, but because that was the only form of power he was seeing. Coercive power corrupts, and absolute coercive power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
And I would think as we look across our society today, we need to keep those wise words of Lord Acton in mind. What happens when you respect diversity of opinion, when you respect independent thinking, that people can speak without fear of retaliation, without censorship, when local knowledge is respected, and we come up with aggregation mechanisms to collate our collective intelligence, we tap into this entirely different dimension of power. In the hierarchy, you have the powerful and the powerless. And probably 2/3 of the people don't have organizational power. No wonder 2/3 of people tend to be not engaged at work. I would proffer to you that in networks, everyone's engaged because there are no powerless people.
And you know what else doesn't come into play? The Peter Principle. Have you heard of that?
Yep.
That really, so you say talk about 2/3 of people not being engaged. And then of the 1/3 left, you've got a third of those who have hit their ceiling immediately because they were set up for failure because they weren't managers to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. In a network, if you find you're in a job where you're not contributing or this isn't quite a right fit, then you just find another team.
Huh, that's incredible. So I guess the way that pay works and advancement isn't the same in one of these. I mean, the
Well,
pay bands and it might be with time or something, but
it's not about
bands go with
advancement. It's
right.
not about advancement. It's about growth. There
Well,
are no
that's good.
positions. There
That's
are
right.
no
That's
positions.
that's
And so
something that, to
it,
get people used to that thought is it's transformation. It-
well, think about it. What does every business want to do in the marketplace? It wants to grow,
Scale.
grow.
And so
Well, if you,
if your business is, if you want to grow your business, let your people grow. Is that
that's exactly right. And just because you advance doesn't mean you're growing.
no? They're
We
not
know a lot of leaders
exclusive.
who are advancing who are not growing, and they're not growing their people. They're just advancing their own personal interests, sometimes even at the expense of a company.
So
You want,
when you have those three things, these three things I'm talking about, when you have a department and you have these, you need an intelligence, power, and performance.
yes.
Intelligence solves a problem, a power is an action taker, and a performance is makes it optimizes it or looks
Yeah.
at the results.
And so what transforms is in the hierarchy, in the network.
Yeah.
We're leveraging collective intelligence because nobody's smarter than everybody, okay? With respect to power, okay, which is about the ability to take action. We have no powerless people. We have a more powerful organization because because everyone is powerful
Yeah.
in this organization, not the elite few. And the result is we are delivering better customer value because not only are we more intelligent, but we're more innovative because we are able to change, to grow. We're able to displace ourselves
Right.
and stay in business.
And then started with a bias and we end up with a bias, but it's a bias for results.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the one bias that you will see in networks. And you're able to collect for the individual blind spots and they
Mm.
don't hold a company back. When you give people unilateral authority, you're amplifying their blind spots. And in a rapidly changing world, it can be fatal.
Well, I got to tell you, I want to thank you for being on here because I know I promised to keep you for, we talked about 40, 45 minutes, and we've definitely gone a whole hour because this is such an interesting topic. And we need to have it. We need to have more of these, I think. And I think this would be good in a smaller organization to kind of embed these ideas and watch how quickly they grow. I'm going to probably have some fun because I have 5 companies that I'm involved with. So I'm going to have fun with some of these ideas for sure. The book is Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody. It's on Amazon right now. It's on the screen, $16.99. Gets to you in 2 days if you're on Prime. And it really, I got through the whole thing in 3 hours. I mean, you can tell I'm pretty versed in most of the aspects of it. Now we have the clarifying questions answered. How do you, what are we doing now to get this out more? Are you available for training? Do you have a team? Do you have, how do people get a hold of you to get this stuff out there?
Any leader that's serious about putting this model in, and I would especially appeal to startups who are growing. When you hit 50 people, you're going to have to organize formally. Don't be a hierarchy, build a network.
Yeah.
And I work with leaders who want to do that. And I do have a website, which is rodcollins.net. And I do want to point out the new book is available in any format you want. You like hardback, it's available. You want paperback, it's available. If you like Kindle, it's available. It's available in all 3 forms.
We got to get an Audible out there. I might take that responsibility on for you, Rod.
All
I may know
right.
somebody with a studio.
Okay, we can talk about that. That sounds good. All right.
All right, so rodcollins.net. Of course, he's a coach on coachingdonebetter.com. He's got a profile. We are going to get more action going on. We're going to have him on live on that platform. I'd like to highlight and showcase this whole thing on there. I really want to make it really a big headline on there because between the sales funnel that I am very uniquely involved with, that licensing of that sales system, and employing the DISC, and that's trying to figure out how to talk to people the way they want to be talked to. I think that's so important to combine that with this system as you're going through an open hierarchy, for lack of a better word, for a no hierarchy, to know how to speak to people and how they want to be spoke to and get that synergy going that much quicker. I just think that's a good combination. I'm really going to be pushing this along with the tenets of a good business makes a great community. That's what our purpose is here, is community over competition. So I thank you, sir.
Oh, Jeremy, great to be with you.
All right, give me half a second. Let me just say goodbye to everybody. We appreciate everyone watching, supporting. Reach out to Rod through Coaching Done Better. Reach out to myself. I've got a schedule on there. Go on there, put yourself on my schedule. If you'd like to learn anything about how to be a coach on Coaching Done Better, there's a code that you can use, Done Better 180. That'll give you 6 free months. It's only $97 a month after that, but we are pushing clients on there. We're going to bring you your clients. You'll be seen, you'll be heard, you'll be in business with Coaching Done Better. Thanks, Rod Collins, and the book, Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody.